The CWD Symposium presents The Bond Between Science and Disability, Forging New Capabilities for Inclusion, which was featured at the 256th ACS National Meeting in New Orleans. We are honored to have Theresa L. Windus give a PowerPoint presentation on Insights from Experience in Mentoring Graduate Students.
All right. Well, first I'd like to thank Lee for organizing this. I think this has been really nice, and to hear what other people's experiences are and to just be able to ask questions has been wonderful. I'm going to talk a little bit today about my personal experiences with mentoring students with disabilities. Excuse me, suffering from allergies today, so I don't know what's in the air, but something's in there. Excuse me. So please don't take this as, again, a standard operating procedure. This was just sort of the things that I've found that have worked for me. Another kind of way of thinking about this is things that I've learned working with wonderful people. Every single person I've worked with disabilities has taught me something new about myself and helped me have a broader experience of life. And so I've really enjoyed this. The other thing I wanted to say was that I came from a background where my mom taught us basic respect for everybody. And I think that follows through in everything that I've learned. Basic respect for people, their abilities, their disabilities, their challenges, their successes, right? Just celebrate people in general and respect them. And so that's my foundational, the foundation I build on is from that point of view. And so I hope you'll kind of see that as I go through the talk. So my background is in computational theoretical physical chemistry, and I worked for quite a while in national labs. And in the government labs, you rarely, at least I rarely saw anyone with a disability. I think I saw one person who was blind in my whole time in the national labs. So I will say I didn't have much experience when I went into academia and then saw that, you know, there are these great, wonderful people who are coming up through the ranks with disabilities, and so I didn't know how to deal with it. Okay, so I'm hoping what I can do is give you a little bit of what I've learned. So I moved to academia about 12 years ago, and since then I've had 9 postdocs, 15 graduate students, and 21 undergraduate students. So I've had a fairly good sized group, and some of them have gone on to very successful careers, some of them have moved on to other areas of science. I believe firmly that part of the graduate experience is learning that maybe this isn't for you, right? Sometimes people are better suited in other things. So I think undergraduate and graduate experience should be a process of learning and growing, finding out about yourself and moving to the best successful career you can have. Out of this group of students, within the known disabilities, I'm going to say that because not everyone discloses. Okay, so I had one student who was a graduate student with me with blindness, 2 mobility issues, 5 with ADD or ADHD, and again, these were known diagnosed, and then 6 who suffered from anxiety or depression issues. And in the last 2, there's some overlap, so these are not totally independent disabilities. So again, I hadn't had a lot of exposure when I came into the academic setting, and so it's been a learning experience. And I think this is one of the things you'll continually learn as you go along, right? What's going to work and what's not going to work. So I'm going to touch base on each student category that I've got here, and just tell you a little bit about what I've learned, what has worked for us, and then hopefully wrap up with some just general thoughts on this. So, blind student. So I had a blind master's student who came to work with me. We knew about a year or so ahead of time that she was going to come. And I can tell you that there was a lot of discussion in the department of whether we should accept this student or not, because we didn't know if we could provide the kind of services that the student needed. And again, you want to accept people and bring them in and make them successful, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we were committed to doing that. So, well, okay, so you're going to see a theme in my talk. Working with her required a lot of conversation and trial and error to figure out what worked for her, okay, so for this student. And you've heard this over and over again, that you have to basically understand what's going to meet the needs of each student individually. Now there's some common themes, but you have to work with each student. Now these conversations were really good because it engaged the student, helped her to become more proactive as an advocate for herself, which is really important for students. And it also helped us to learn about what she needed. So we looked for lots of resources to give us ideas of what could work. I'll talk a little bit about resources later, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here. But for example, we connected her with Hobie. Okay, so we'd seen Hobie's paper, and we connected her with Hobie just to get some ideas of what might work. The other thing I learned is it takes a lot of prep time, okay? And you heard from Ashley about the needs for books and texts and diagrams. And the disability services doesn't always provide that in a timely way. They are overworked in general, okay? And so it's very difficult. So we tried to make sure we had a lot of prep time working with all of the instructors we knew that she was going to take classes with. Any papers we knew she would need for research, we would get those taken care of as quickly as we could ahead of time. Required a lot of coordination. Now, I don't want to make this sound like so onerous that you should never ever do this, right? But it's a coordination thing that you just have to be aware of, right? That you have to send books maybe a semester ahead of time. Maybe you have to actually hire some undergraduates to help with some of the papers, right? Make it a team effort. It doesn't have to be all just the student and the instructor. It's a team effort. And it's well worth it, because I can tell you everyone learns in that environment. All right, so we worked with book vendors to try to get resource materials that were useful. One of the most useful things that we were able to do was to get PDFs of most of the books that we were involved with or we were using. And those were mostly accessible through the JAWS screen readers. Not all of it, and of course the diagrams are not at all accessible in general, because they don't usually provide good descriptions in the graphics. We tried to work with them on getting Braille versions. We pretty much met a brick wall, I would say, on that front, just because it's not economically feasible for them in general, unfortunately. Well, so my blind student already had guides, but we also provided guides on occasion in our own laboratory space, going from one room to, say, a conference room or something like that. But I will say she was incredibly good at, once she figured out where everything was, just making it there on her own. I'm totally impressed with the memory. That I mean, I would forget how to get from room A to B, no doubt, if it was me. Assistants were wonderful. So we had graduate students in my lab and undergraduates who would basically work with this student, help her in her classes, taking notes, making sure that the graphs were something that were accessible, and just helping out in that arena. And I'm going to say this was a two-way street. Those assistants, if they had taken the class before, they were learning more in that class the second time when they were taking it around, because they had to describe things to someone, right? So it was a good two-way street in many ways. So it was a really interesting environment. Okay, and those assistants really gave generously of their time. Sometimes they were paid. Oftentimes they just gave volunteer time as well. So. Okay, the JAWS reader, which you've probably heard about, it works really well, but it's not for everything. If you go back to the old literature, those PDFs that are made out of the old literature are just impossible for a JAWS reader to read. And so we've had to do interpretations of articles, things like that. So, Braille Printer and Labeler. Okay, this is where we started to have some fun. Okay, I knew nothing about Braille printers before this student came. We managed to get Disability Services to get us a Braille printer. And so this actually helped us to do some of the simple graphs that would show trends and things like that. It also helped us to do some of the texts that, that this particular student thought would be more a permanent need and wanted to have a Braille version. The labeler was fun. We got to label our microwave. Would never have thought of labeling the microwave. It was fun. You label all the 1, 2, 3, the start, the stop. We labeled things in our lab, right, to make it accessible. We also, what was really fun was that we got the lab, so I'm in Ames lab space. They actually did Braille on the door plaques. So it became official that all of the door plaques started having these Braille accessible plates. And that was something the lab had never thought of before, and it's a very simple, small adjustment that helps a student to orientate themselves in the workspace. So some other things we tried were Wiki Sticks. I don't know if you know what these are, but they're basically wax sticks that you can shape into all sorts of different ways. And whenever we were talking about complex potential energy surfaces or graphs, these Wiki Sticks were just really quick things you could pull out and the student could feel and be able to access really easily. So that was really nice. 3D printing, we did some of that as well. We wanted something a little bit different than what Hobie described. We were actually doing some of the heavier elements in the periodic table. So for example, if you wanted to distinguish between oxygen and sulfur, that's not so easy to do with your general chemistry kit, right? If you do just the second row, technically, elements, it's not so bad. But when you start getting the heavier elements, you can't just tell this thing that's bonded, has 2 bonds. Well, that could be oxygen or sulfur. Which is it, right? So we use the 3D modeling to help us identify which elements those were by putting Braille or maybe different kinds of shapes for those elements. So it was really fun and interesting. I'd say we had some success with that, maybe not a lot of success because it takes quite a bit of effort. And so there was a trade-off between was the effort worth it or just describing to the student what they were seeing through assistance, right? So there was a little bit of both of those. And then we had this one time when I was trying to explain surface crossings between a ground state and an excited state, right? And the typical picture is you show like avoided crossings, and then you show the point of intersection. And the student was just not quite getting it with the things that we were using. So I had an undergraduate who said, well, let me try doing something with clay, right? And so he pulled out clay and made this just really great model. And I think it was actually fun for everybody, right? Because we thought about, well, what does this dimension mean, right? And as opposed to just looking at the picture and saying, oh, that's fun and interesting, and not necessarily really understanding what it was. When you're making that clay model and you have to describe what each dimension is in that model, you actually start to really learn what you're seeing, right? Or what you're feeling. So the other thing was to make sure people didn't move things in the lab or that they cleaned up after themselves, right? Because things that are just lying on the floor can be hazards. And then again, I'll say that some of this was provided through our student disability resources, but not all of it. We worked with many different resources to try to get these sorts of things in place. These were the things that worked for us for this particular student. So the mobility challenge students that I had, again, lots of conversation on what you need to do for this particular student to help them succeed in their job. I will say the 2 students that I have were not severely mobility challenged in the sense that there wasn't like a wheelchair or anything that was very large, so we had to worry about space issues. But they were significant in that we had to worry about modifications to workstations. So adjusting the height of the desktop so that you could put, say, a footstool underneath so that person could rest their leg because otherwise it would be aching by the end of the day. And making sure that everything was within reach in a reasonable way. So just making sure those workstations were what they needed. Then adjusting travel time expectations. We'd go out to lunch, right? Maybe we'd add an extra half an hour or something on there just to make sure that we would have time for everybody to get there comfortably, not feel rushed, and make it a pleasant experience, right? And then again, making sure people in the lab and office pick up and clean up after themselves. And you know, this is a good thing that we all should be doing anyway, but we don't always do it. Okay. For ADD and ADHD, this one is interesting because not all students, I mean, all of these things have very big ranges, right? Even, you know, blindness has lots of ranges. Mobility impairment has lots of ranges. ADD and ADHD also has this. And again, you know, the key is to have lots of conversations. I'm just so impressed by the graduate students that come into my group who've had these sorts of disabilities and didn't necessarily know about it until they were in undergrad or graduate school. The coping mechanisms that they've already put in place hold them really well. So by the time they get to me, usually they've got some sort of coping mechanisms in place, but not always. And that's where these conversations, you know, about what you need, what can I do to help, are really important. Again, sometimes modifications to the work area are needed. Some students need to have some low traffic distraction areas to help them focus. This might mean, since I'm a computational person, this might mean allowing them to work at home or finding a spare office and letting them have that space to be available to them. You know, so my guideline for graduate school is I don't really care how many hours you put in, but I want to see the progress, right? And so I use the same kind of metric with all my students, right? You're allowed to work wherever you want. I mean, I like to see you in the lab sometime during the day, but you're allowed to basically work where you want as long as I'm seeing progress, right? And this particular rule benefits everyone in the group, but it is especially useful for people with ADHD so they can get their own environment. And then, oh wow, I'm way over already? Gosh. And I'll say provide opportunities for hyperness. So, you know, sometimes there will be group outbreaks. It's kind of fun. They often need specific time management and help with project goals. All students need that, but this group needs a little bit more help in this particular area in general. And then writing and communicating can be very difficult for some of these students. And I found this over and over again. All right, anxiety, depression, I'm going to go through really fast. Again, lots of discussion, maybe some modifications to the work area, especially if anxiety is there. One thing that I've learned is being aware that medication changes can actually cause some significant loss of productivity during that medication change period. And so allowing flexibility in the work environment is really important at that time. They might need more time to prepare for talks, right? All students need that sort of thing. And this group, if you're not hearing from them, you have to be proactive, right? Because in the case of depression in particular, you need to make sure that you're helping your student along with that. And there might be times of off time. So in other words, I've had a student who's taken time off, like a semester off, to help them cope through their depression at the time and then come back to the lab. So all students need strong leadership. They need time to pursue their ideas and flexibilities. And all students need guidance through scientific issues, the soft skills, how do you deal with people, time management, all of that. So I think that applies to every single person in the lab. Students with disabilities, I think there is this added level of communication, but that it benefits all students, right? This is communication is key. Don't be afraid to try something new, right? It may not work, but it's okay to try it. And then the one that I struggle with, excuse me, is separating the disability from the chemability. And what I mean by that is that occasionally it's hard to tell if a student is struggling because they're not understanding the chemical concept, just in general, or if it's their disability that is causing the barrier, right? So, you know, we've all had, well, if you teach, you've all had students that just are struggling with the concept, and it's not because of a disability necessarily, it's just because that concept is difficult, you haven't approached it the right way. And so, you know, again, conversation, digging, understanding what is the issue. And sometimes that means there is a disability issue that's causing that barrier that you have to figure out another way to go around and make it happen. I swear I'm getting close. All right, so just a few resources. You've heard about the Committee on Chemists with Disabilities. We're definitely in a process where we're trying to make more resources available. And then I've got a couple of other resources here that you can have later. And then the summary here is communication's key, right? Just talk. Talk frequently. And don't think just because you've solved it once, it's going to stay solved. You have to keep talking. Ask lots of questions and keep looking for new resources. Describe slides and content in different ways. So you'll notice I didn't have any graphics for those of you who are not visually impaired. You'll notice I didn't have any graphics. Part of that was intentional. Part of it was because I didn't have any great graphics. But, you know, really describe your graphics very clearly if you have graphics, and put my points on the slides. So, and last thing I'll say is that accommodations often help many students. They don't just help the one student that you're particularly interested in at the moment. Oftentimes these things really do help the whole group as a whole. So, now I'm done.
For more information, please contact us at cwd@acs.org. Check out these other videos and follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ACS_CWD. Also connect with us on Facebook at cwd.acs/. This video is brought to you by the American Chemical Society, the world's largest scientific society.